certainly has brought so many issues to the forefront and continues to do so, and we're just so grateful and I'm just so privileged and honored to present him. So please, I won't take up much of his time because the hour runs so quickly. I want to welcome Dr. Shiv Chopra, and I'll hand it all over to him. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for being here. You know, this show this year seems very encouraging. I've been coming here for the last 5 years. It used to be, first it was sparse, but secondly, most people used to be quite elderly. The issues that we're talking about don't concern as much the elderly as the young and very young and newborns. Whether we talk about food safety, GMOs, drugs, vaccines, they're all related subjects. What I've been seeing at this show, somehow there's a change occurring in society. There are a lot of young people walking around upstairs. Mothers pushing strollers with babies in them. That just shows us that the community and the public at large are getting the message and very concerned. Probably they're not yet ready to take action, but that will follow as you begin to talk to each other and learn what's going on in the world all over about healthcare, about our foods, about things that are being pushed on us as teachers, as parents, as hospital workers, as medical doctors, whatever. The world has been taken over by corporations, a few, 8 or 10 corporations. These corporations are so huge. They control food production, the whole food industry, the slaughterhouses, the drug industries, and the vaccine industry, which is the subject of this afternoon, the vaccines. Vaccines is something unique that nobody wants to touch. Nobody wants to criticize. There's such fear in people, in the medical community, and in the media, that they're so scared to touch this subject that nobody wants to speak about it. Parents who are being told that they must get their children vaccinated against this vaccine, that vaccine, huge number of vaccines, almost from day one, at birth, and continuing, and now all the way to almost the graveyard. Because they're telling old people to take vaccines. Of course, the young people have been under pressure all this time. And the scare is that if you don't take vaccines, something very serious is going to happen to you, and quite likely you might die. It's all a lie. It's all a false propaganda to scare the public. The amount of money being put on this is so huge. Bill Gates has created a foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, $18 billion, installed a charitable organization to control the world's food supply and vaccines. To go all over the world to vaccinate children without any conscience that these vaccines are doing very, very serious harm to the health of children. And when somebody like me speaks out, they go after them, they get them fired. If they're medical doctors, they get their license revoked, and they call them frauds, and they call them child killers, and they go on CNN, and the media goes out. Oh, another person died in China yesterday, and there's going to be a pandemic of flu. Pandemic. One person died, he was 88 years of age, of flu, and now the whole world is going to get a pandemic. So watch out, hurry up. The airline industry is losing money because people are not going to China just because one person died. There are 1.5 billion people living in China. There might be a flu and you might catch it. It's all false. Saying false doesn't make it false. You have to prove it by science. You have to confront these people. And I have, for the last several years, put it on my website, explaining the basic science of what vaccines are, what vaccines are supposed to do, and why they're not working, and why they are dangerous. The conclusion is, all good vaccines, there's no good vaccine, absolutely no good vaccine anywhere. Totally unnecessary and dangerous for health. Your health and your children's health, and especially the baby's health. Let me now explain what vaccines do, what they're supposed to do, and why they're not doing what they're supposed to do. After all, a vaccine is supposed to protect you against some infectious disease. Whatever that, it could be cholera, it could be flu, it could be measles, mumps, pertussis, whatever vaccines are being given. The vaccines work by, you all hear ordinary terminology, antigen. It generates antibody. When that organism, that microorganism gets in your body, then the body reacts to it. It takes about 2 weeks, it produces antibody. So the material that went in is called antigen, and then the material that your body produces is called antibody. So the antibody will fight the antigen. Now, antigen, by nature, has to be a protein, or a protein that is attached to something else, could be a carbohydrate, whatever, something attached to either a foreign protein, and it has to be a foreign protein, because we already have proteins. We don't produce antibody against those proteins. We have our muscles, we have glands, we have everything. We have our proteins. Every individual has or her own personal proteins, decided by nature, God, if you like. That's what distinguishes every human being from every other human being. That's why we cannot take each other's tissues or blood so easily. If we took other people's animal proteins or other people's proteins the whole nature will collapse. It's law of God. You cannot take any foreign substance into your body. Let me explain. When you eat anything, there are three major ingredients in your diet. Those are proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Just three major items. Of course, you have vitamins and minerals. Those are water soluble, but these are the food constituents: proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. When you eat, then every protein, whether it comes from meat, milk, or beans, must be digested down to 20 single amino acids. Those amino acids then are absorbed across your intestinal tract and gets into the blood, and your body makes your own protein. Cannot take foreign protein. Your body makes your own protein. Similarly, when you eat starch or sugar, it must be broken down to glucose. That's the only sugar that gets into the blood. And your body then makes its own starch called glycogen in the liver. The same thing happens to fats. When you eat any kind of fat, it gets digested down to fatty acids, and the liver acts on them, and those things are, fatty acids are absorbed into your blood, and your body makes your own fat. You cannot absorb any of these things. When you get infected by an infectious organism, what happens is it can only get through two ways mainly, either through your nose or through your mouth. In the water, or you inhale from somewhere, or sometimes it could occur through an accident, either by injection, abrasion, or sexual contact. Those are the only 3 points of entry into your body. When that organism gets inside the body, the first thing, if it's through your nose, you sneeze. First reaction is to expel it. If it gets into the stomach, you may vomit. If it gets through, you may get diarrhea. These are all good things. These are protections provided to your body. So don't worry if you get 24-hour flu, you get diarrhea or vomiting, it's okay. Nothing's going to happen. It's a good thing. You're flushing it out. So these organisms, that's the first reaction. If it still manages to get through, right away, there are glands that trap these organisms. Then there are lymph glands. Then in the lymph glands, these organisms, the invasive body cells come to attack that place, and then they pick them up, and then they chew them up, they turn them into messages from protein, what I call antigen. The message is sent to a tiny little gland in the neck, thymus gland, and that recognizes, oh, a foreign agent has come in. That processes that information in the thymus gland. The thymus gland sends the message to the bone marrow to get active and produce antibody. So those are called thymus T cells. In the bone, they're called B cells. This is the complete cycle of your protection. Now, it'll take about 2 weeks after the infection has occurred and has gone through into the blood, and antibody is produced, and your body is pretty well saturated with this antibody, and it's called primary antibody. Primary because it happened the first time. If that second organism, and you recover, if the same organism comes back the second time, the antibody is produced within 24 hours to 48 hours. So now you cannot be infected. You don't get that disease. You don't get that same flu. You don't get whatever it was. Primary antibody, secondary antibody. This is body's memory system. It is a gift of nature. This is the way the whole system works. Now what happens? Some of these colleagues of mine, they started to get the idea, just learning from centuries before knowledge, that if you get the infection once, it doesn't happen again, and they knew that from smallpox or whatever else, that there can be a protection. And then the word vaccine was invented. The word vaccine comes from the word vacca in Latin and Sanskrit, meaning cow. Because the ancient people had figured out that the cowpox virus is related to the smallpox virus, and that the cowpox virus, if you get infected with it, you don't get smallpox disease. If you're a milkman or milkmaid and your hand get a raise and the cow has cowpox on its teats, and then those people, even if there's an outbreak of smallpox, they didn't get the disease. These observations were made 300 years ago by a British doctor working in India. And then he came back and spoke to the Royal Society of Medicine, and then Edward Jenner got the wind of it, who was a chemist, and he actually went and asked around from some British farmers, and they said, yes, that's true. So Edward Jenner became the father of vaccination. Got the idea from India, propagated it in Britain, and he becomes the father of vaccination. The word vacca, cow, vache in French. That idea was picked up by a French chemist who later on is called microbiologist, or the father of microbiology, Louis Pasteur, and he thought he would make vaccines artificially like nature had made for smallpox. He made 3 vaccines. One for anthrax, one for rabies, and one for fowl cholera. All failed. None of them worked. His idea was, if he takes the rabies virus and puts it through instead of dogs, he puts it through rabbits or sheep and so on. He thought that then the rabbit brain would be used as vaccine. That rabbit brain killed more people than rabies disease itself. Because rabies occurs once in a while, but this guy was injecting the rabies, the brain. That itself was causing disease. Similarly, anthrax, vaccine can kill, didn't work. By this time, many other diseases that used to be horrible, like the plague and so on, and used to kill millions of people, it started to disappear. Because once they figured out that these are microbes doing these diseases, then hygiene was put into place. The London fire, the famous London fire, and so forth. And they figured out that there are rats, there are fleas, and so on. Once you break the cycle of infection, that's how the diseases were prevented. That idea of sterilization and hygiene and clean water started to be propagated, and when we come into the early 20th century, then many diseases either disappeared or became minor or uncommon. But the idea of making vaccines kept on going. So from in the beginning of the 20th century, 1900, and all the way to 43, many diseases Smallpox was already going down in a big way. Plague had kind of basically disappeared, and other diseases weren't occurring. And then, by this time, they had introduced 3 vaccines, what we call triple vaccine: diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, the whooping cough. They were even made compulsory, but they were causing more disease by those vaccines. And there were almost a couple of hundred vaccines going around at that time for syphilis, for gonorrhea, for all kinds of things. Nothing worked. It went on. Nobody looked at that. Nobody looked at their safety. Nobody looked at it. Just was assumed that if you gave injections of these same things, you kill them beforehand, or you or you give them by artificial means, or through this or that. Nothing worked, and continued to do major harm, and nobody ever questioned. So there were almost 200 vaccines. Then there was a major investigation in the United States, and most vaccines were dropped except those 3. DPT remained. By about 1943, all the diseases, that after all you have to measure harm by some kind of a measure. So the measure was what diseases are causing death in small children. Measles was one of them. And then by this time, by 1943, the death rate had come down to virtually 0 from every disease in children. But the companies kept going, and vaccines were introduced around 1948 in a big way. Still, we're talking about DPT. Many other vaccines were dropped, but DPT continued. All of a sudden, you come into the early 50s, polio becomes a big thing. At this time, nobody knew, we microbiologists did not know how to grow viruses as opposed to bacteria. Bacteria can be grown on milk or beef broth and things like that. They're larger organisms. But viruses cannot be grown on any artificial media. Virus is pure DNA. It needs a living cell. So it needs to get inside a living cell, and it pulls the DNA of the living cell to make its own DNA. This is how the virus becomes the parasite of living cells. So you needed, if you wanted to make a vaccine, you needed living cells. Polio had become an issue at this time in the early 50s, and the American government told a researcher, Dr. Jonas Salk, to make a national emergency and try and produce a vaccine against polio. Why did polio all of a sudden become a major thing at this time is not a mystery now. At that time it was a mystery, but it was a simple thing that happened. After the war, hygiene was still growing. Personal hygiene was getting better. People were learning how to take care of water, and they put flush toilets in their homes. And all the sewage went to the beaches, where the children were playing and bathing. So they were picking up now polio from there. Therefore, polio is called a disease of cleanliness. It just suddenly started to become more common. And when the vaccine was now produced, it was produced because you cannot grow it on any artificial media. So Jonas Salk took monkeys and took out their kidneys and chopped them up and put the virus on them and kept it there for 2 or 3 days. Then they put all kinds of other things in it, like beef broth and egg albumin and gelatin and all kinds of things. And then 3 days later, they took the fluid off where there was polio virus, and then on into that they put formaldehyde to kill the virus, and that became the polio vaccine. That was the first polio vaccine. Then they discovered that actually it was, that polio vaccine was even causing polio, except they changed the definition of polio. Instead of measuring it, the polio within 48 hours, they started to measure it some 2-3 weeks later. And there were other diseases causing polio too. So they said, oh, polio is coming down. Another scientist comes around and says we should not be giving killed polio vaccine. We can get the same vaccine, and that's now we have grown it in monkeys. And so a scientist called Sabin, Albert Sabin, he produced the oral polio vaccine, so it could be given on a sugar cube. So the two scientists were now competing. Should it be oral polio vaccine or the live, oral or the killed polio vaccine? One is live, one is killed. And then they both discovered that both were causing polio. And they discovered another horrible thing. Because it was grown in monkey kidneys, monkeys were caught in the wild in Africa. Monkeys were carrying their own viruses that nobody could detect. One virus went through, is given only a number, SV40, which caused cancer. And the world was horrified. And then they said, don't give this vaccine. That vaccine still, whether it's live or the virus now has contaminated the entire polio system and the tissue cultures. During the same time, because of the monkeys, something else happened. At that time, another virus went through. Because it's monkeys, they're called simian viruses. One virus went through that was very similar to what later on becomes the HIV. There was no HIV before. All of a sudden, HIV became a world thing, related to the monkey virus also. That way, many other viruses went through, and they still are in the vaccine system, and nobody wants to talk about them. These are just the cancer viruses. Measles vaccine was introduced in the early 60s, and several other vaccines, rubella, mumps, came on in the early 70s. I am a vaccine expert. I'm a veterinarian, I'm a microbiologist. My initial training is all in vaccines. You hear me here talking about food safety. That was just a later part of my career, but it was originally all about vaccines. I'm a fellow of the World Health Organization studying vaccines. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, making allergy vaccines. I worked at Health Canada, approving vaccines. Rubella, mumps, and some measles went through my hands in the early 70s, 71 or so. I was very concerned with the kinds of things that I just now described, but I had no proof. At that time, it was only a theoretical possibility. That's the safety part. I also had very serious concern about the efficacy of vaccines like rubella and mumps. Rubella is a very simple, innocuous disease of children. It brings fever for a day or two, and the child gets a bit of rash, and then gets better, then immune for life. By age 15, 85% of the children or people become permanently immune. Mothers used to call it kissing disease. Encourage the children to kiss each other, catch the infection now so that later on, when you're adult, no harm will occur. The harm, what was the harm from rubella? Rubella babies, possibility of rubella babies. In mothers, in childbearing age, if a mother fell pregnant during a rubella outbreak, and if the mother was not yet immune, and then in the first trimester of her pregnancy, if she caught rubella, then there was a remote possibility that she may bear a child with some defects, blindness or something like that in the child. Just imagine, 15% left. They have to be childbearing age. It has to be the first trimester of pregnancy. There has to be an outbreak of rubella, and she catches it, and the possibility. So therefore, it's a remote possibility. It's a possibility, but the probability is extremely, extremely low. So what my suggestion was, that why don't we test girls, because the boys are not concerned. It's only the girls, so it's not even 15%, it's 7.5% population. Why don't we test the girls? Test their blood, one drop of blood. You can test whether she's had rubella or not. Now, if she's not protected, you can vaccinate them. Or tell them not to become pregnant, whatever you want to do. Not so the companies. They want to give it to every single child. They wanted to give it to in schools and everywhere. To at least 80% of the children. The idea is if 80% of the people are immune, then the disease doesn't transmit. It breaks the cycle. It's called herd immunity. The whole herd of people now is immune, so don't worry about it. But if 85% people are already immune, what are you trying to create? It's already more than what you're trying to create. Let's go further. From then to now, 40 years have passed. To this day, 100% of the population has been vaccinated against these diseases and boosted and repeatedly given. First you get it when the child is very little, then they go to school, then they go to high school, but the disease keeps re-erupting. There are outbreaks in thoroughly vaccinated people. And when that happens, they say, oh, maybe the immigrants are bringing it. How can the immigrants bring it? If your population is already protected, then you should be safe. Don't worry about what the immigrant brings. But first of all, the immigrant can't bring it anyway, because before they enter, they're forced to be vaccinated. So everything is a lie. This is the medical profession sending this kind of information. You can read it as late as yesterday, everyday newspaper, the immigrants are bringing it. Or poor people, or the blacks are not getting vaccinated. These kinds of lies are about every disease. Mumps is the same story, only the boys might get orchitis or inflammation of their testes and may make them sterile. It's exactly the opposite of rubella. So you don't need measles, you don't need mumps, you don't need rubella, you don't need DPT, you don't need any of these. Why are you continuing to give it? Now, during this same period, there's a huge increase of diseases that used to be extremely rare. Autism, diabetes, obesity, autoimmune diseases, allergies, cancer. All these diseases used to be rare. Now there's autism in 1 in 50 children. 1 in 50. It used to be 1 in 10,000. Where did it come from? In the vaccine, it's not just those foreign proteins that I'm talking about. There are also heavy metals. There's mercury. There's aluminum. There's fish oil. There is beef serum. There is pig serum. There's gelatin. All these untested, dangerous materials, and formaldehyde causing cancer. All these ingredients, 70 or 80, that are not even declared, they're in the vaccine. So when you take this shot, it's injected. It's injected. As it goes in, it explodes inside your body like a cluster bomb. It explodes. And its droplets now go through the blood and then hit every part and organ of the body. Whatever comes in the way could get knocked out. If it's your brain, the child gets fever for a day, and the next day the mother says, "What happened to this child?" Becomes autistic. If the pancreas comes in the way, diabetes. If thyroid comes in the way, obesity. And of course there are all these viruses causing cancer. So all these materials are being injected. And the governments and the doctors and the media are saying constantly, look at what happened in 1918. There was this flu. Hundreds of millions of people died from swine flu. 1918. How they called it swine flu is a mystery. Because at that time, nobody knew what a virus was. Nobody knew how to grow a virus. But it happened after the war. People died. Nowadays they say, somebody says 200 million people died, somebody says 50 million people died, a lot of people died. And they say all died from swine flu. They call it swine flu. That was after. First, they called it Spanish flu. And the Spanish called it the French flu. They were on the opposite side of the border fighting the war. He says, Spanish gave it, no, the French gave it Spanish flu, French flu. And a lot of people did die, that's true. But during that same time, a drug was invented called aspirin. And people took aspirin by galore to bring down the fever and pain, not knowing that the aspirin can cause internal bleeding and kill you. And also, it was after the war, people were debilitated, all kinds of things were happening. So we don't know. And there were no antibiotics. There were secondary infections, many people died from that. So we don't know exactly what happened after the Spanish flu. But many years passed, we jumped to 1957. That's the first time another flu wave came. This time, it was called Hong Kong flu. That wasn't good enough. Then they started to call it Chinese flu. Then they called it Mao flu. Well, why not Bush flu? Because after all, it was during Bush's era that this whole business of bird flu again came up. Well, they keep on saying, you know, there are 18 or 20 strains of flu viruses. They say keep them mutating and so on. But the birds and their viruses have lived on the earth for 65 million years. And those viruses have been mating and mutating for all those 65 million years. The sky yet hasn't fallen. And the birds haven't died. They're still there. And they're saying they're coming from somewhere in the sky, the birds are migrating. But if it happens in China, how come it goes directly to Europe? Is that virus a racist or what? Only kills the white people? What's wrong with the world? Why doesn't it go to India next door? Where the flamingos go to nest every winter. But the flu doesn't go from China to India, it comes to Ukraine or America. So there's something wrong. So then they say, oh, it was H5N1, whatever number they're given. In the last 2 or 3 days, they said a different strain has come up. And one guy died. So there could be a pandemic coming. Unfortunately, there's no barrier we can put for the flu. It's worse than a nuclear bomb. It gets through anyway. So then there's the other scare that goes on. This is the Saddam factor. Or the terrorists, bioterrorism. They might bring in some organisms that now we're not used to. They might bring in anthrax. They might bring in smallpox. Now, smallpox was eradicated by 1978. There has not been a single case ever since, except now a year ago or a few months ago. Because now, by law, in the United States, all United States Army personnel have to take smallpox vaccine again, and their whole families, and they cannot refuse, and they cannot tell anybody that they were forced to take it. Now there's a case that smallpox was transmitted by an individual to some other people. So through vaccine, we actually could transmit smallpox and recreate it. When the smallpox was eradicated from the world, a decision was made by all countries to destroy the smallpox virus. And they did it, except 2 countries, the United States and the Soviet Union. They still have them in their boats. And they're saying the terrorists may get that virus and spread it. How? If it's in the custody of the United States government and the Soviet Union or Russia now, how can anybody steal? Unless they themselves give them out. This is what the American government did. They supplied anthrax to Iraq, to Saddam Hussein when he was a friend of the United States, to try and test it on his own people or in Iran. And they found it doesn't work. Because anthrax is a disease that occurs occasionally in animals if they get infected. Because anthrax is an organism that, if it comes in the ground, it turns into very hardy spores that can stay in your garden, on your carrots for as long as 2 years or more, and nothing happens. If you get cut, you get healed. But occasionally, cattle or horse or sheep get infected and animal dies. And when an animal dies from anthrax, we veterinarians know that this is anthrax because blood is oozing out from all holes or orifices of the body. So we don't conduct a post-mortem on that animal. That animal is burned and then buried 8 feet down. But what happens is, if there are people who are working with animal hides or wool, then a clump of blood with anthrax on there dries up, it turns into spores, and if you shake it like that, you can inhale a lot of spores and get anthrax. But anthrax does not transmit from a person to another person. Our government in Canada, with this fear of anthrax coming from Iraq or some terrorist, bought $5 million worth of antibiotics that has never been used. And the antibiotic they bought was the worst antibiotic. Penicillin could work. Anthrax is still being tested. Anthrax vaccine is being tested in children to see if it will work. I have worked with anthrax with my own hands. I made vaccine with it. Nothing happens. There are sometimes accidents. Somebody even spilled a whole flask of anthrax grown, and we just washed it down. Nothing happened. But this fear-mongering, telling people that now something calamitous is going to happen, and you should take this vaccine, that vaccine, and you're actually now damaging the health of your children. When you come to meetings like this, sometimes very worried mothers come up to me and say, is there any vaccine that we should take? I'm traveling, maybe I should. And I said, no, you don't. But they say, my doctor says you should. I said, well, go speak to your doctor. Teach your doctor. It's you and between you and your doctor, but ultimate decision is yours. Somebody says, but I'm a nurse, I'm a doctor, but they're forcing me to take it because I have to, I'll come in contact with patients. Or I'm a doctor, I might catch it from patients. But patients are not coming with that infection, but the doctor. So this whole thing is being twisted. And people are coerced and forced into taking vaccine. I'm not a medical doctor, even if I were, I won't tell you to take or not take your vaccine. My job is to explain to you the science of vaccine. I have put it on my website. I tell people that this is what happens. Vaccines, there's no science behind it. If there is, I am willing to debate with any world expert on CNN or any television or any public forum. Nobody ever comes. I challenge them to come here or anywhere at the WHO. Do you know, the United States now have passed a law that if your child gets damaged, you cannot sue the drug company. This is law. Because the judges, 6-2, Supreme Court of the United States ruled that if we pass that law and you were able to sue a company, well, that will destroy the entire vaccine industry. These are very valuable drugs.
Is that true in Canada as well?
So who gave them this information that vaccines are valuable drugs? The President of the United States, first it was Bush, now Obama, going up on stage and declaring national emergency, that flu is coming, a pandemic is coming. The word pandemic has become sort of this is a pandemic strain. Pandemic has never happened. Why are you calling it pandemic? Pandemic means all over the world. But there's one case they're calling it pandemic strain. So that means the governments, the philanthropists like Bill Gates, the medical profession, the media, they all are on one side. And nobody dares speak up. Who will speak up? It is your right to take or not take the vaccine. If somebody forces you, whether it's your medical profession, whether it's a government, whether it's a hospital, or whether it's a school board, if anybody forces or tries to say you have to take the vaccine, otherwise you can't send your child to school, you can't work in this job, you can't be a nurse, tell them, put it in writing, nothing will happen to me. Nobody will. That is the public's way of reacting. You don't have to fight, you don't have to demonstrate, you don't have to do anything. If the public just simply says, I am not going to take any vaccines. If you're forcing it on me, by policy or law, whatever, put it in writing, nothing will happen to me, then I have the right to sue you all. It will stop. Thank you.